Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. Today you will study meditation addressed in other religion than Buddhism. So you will study meditative practice in Brahmanism and contemplative practice in Christianity. Let's look at the meditative practice in Brahmanism. In Brahmanism, the essence of man was the Atman, and the essence of the universe was Brahman. There is a principle of microcosm, such as Atman, and macrocosm, such as universe. Equivalence led to the famous conclusion that Atman is equal to Brahman. As the Chandogya Upanishad put it, "Thou art dead" means man is in essence the same as the essence of the world. It does not look to you now, but it can be understood by the wise or by the enlightened. The essence sought in man was what kept him alive and sentient. Various candidates were proposed, but a favored candidate was breath. Breath was probably the original meaning of the word Atman, which has become the most widely known of the Sanskrit word of the soul. The Buddha built on this principle of macrocosm and microcosm equivalence. Although the Buddha stood Upanishad conclusion on its head. There is an emotional world of difference between Rig Veda and Upanishad. In Rig Veda, life seems to be something one cannot have enough because in the Rig Veda, man is thought to be born and die only once. But Upanishad offers an escape from samsara, keeping going. Samsara means keeping going. The endless round of rebirth and consequent suffering. So there's a difference, the meaning of a word between Rig Veda and Upanishad. The solution of this difference lies in gnosis. Gnosis means a realization of one's true nature. At death, the soul which realizes its identity with Brahman. Brahman is the ground of the universe, so the soul will merge into Brahman and never again know the pain of individuation. The identification of one's Atman with Brahman is at the same time the truth to be discovered and the end to be attained. However, the Buddha denied the essence of individual Atman and correspondingly denied an essence of the word Brahma. So there is no creator or there is no omnipotent God. Also, there is no underlying unity to phenomena. The most important step that the Buddha took was to turn the doctrine of karma on his head. Karma, action. Therefore, underlying karma include some ethical aspect. The Buddha ethicized it completely, and the Buddha made morality intrinsic, so deny all soteriological value to ritual and all ultimate value to social distinction, such as a caste system. In place of a highly particularistic view of duty, he propounded a simple and universal ethical dualism of right and wrong. The practice associated with Gnostic soteriology is meditation. Meditation has not been said in Vedic literature about the technique of meditation. The Buddhist texts are probably the earliest version we have on that subject, meditation. But Upanishads do mention meditation. It is possible that they mean by it no more than what is meant in common English parlance, as when we say to someone is meditating on some topic, in other words, pondering it. Later Sanskrit texts describe the means to gnosis as sitting quietly in a secluded place, withdrawing the sense from the object and stilling all discursive thought. Such concentration was to lead to an experience which was beyond what can be put into a mere word. Although it can be described in metaphysical language as a saving truth. Overall, the goal of meditation was to realize the truth of received teachings. So in Brahmanism, practitioner engaged in meditation to equalize himself to Brahman. But the Buddha denied Atman or Brahman. But Buddha proposed practitioner need to attain truth, gnosis. To do that, practitioner need to engage in meditation. To achieve a successful meditation practice, practitioner need to build on good karma. Therefore, the Buddha brought the ethical perspective in thought, speech, and action. What about meditative approach in Christianity? In Christianity, they call contemplative practice instead of using meditation. Christian tradition has excellent instruction and guidance for the beginning of the spiritual journey. Christian tradition enshrined, especially in the central practice of Benedictine monks and nuns down through the ages. According to Christian tradition, contemplation is a pure gift of God. There are two kinds of practices. One is called centering prayer. The other one is eventually reach out contemplative prayer. Centering prayer is a movement of divine love designed to renew the Christian contemplative tradition. A centering prayer consists of consenting to the call of the Holy Spirit to consent to God's presence and action within. Centering prayer is based on the format for the profound form of prayer that Jesus suggests in Matthew, in Bible. If you want to pray, enter your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Centering prayer is a contemporary name for the practice that Jesus refers to as a prayer in secret in the Sermon on the Mount. Centering prayer has been given other names such as pure prayer, prayer of faith, prayer of the heart, and prayer of simplicity. Centering prayer is a discipline designed to reduce some obstacles to reach out contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer is a process of interior transformation, a conversion initiated by God and leading to divine union. One's way of seeing reality changes in this process. A reconstructing of consciousness takes place which empowers one to perceive and respond to everyday life with increasing sensitivity to the divine presence in, through, and even beyond everything that happens. Then God asks us to live that new life in the circumstances of everyday life, contradicted by turmoil, opposition, and anxieties of all kinds. People need to be confronted by the vicissitude of daily life. The alteration between contemplative prayer and external action gradually integrated the two and established practitioner in the contemplative dimension of the gospel, which is a new and transformed state of consciousness. Centering prayer puts into effect the first two recommendations of Jesus' formula by leaving behind external concerns and by discontinuing the interior dialogue that usually accompanies ordinary psychological awareness. You might not know that, but everybody has some interior dialogue to himself or herself. Jesus' recommendation, in other words, pray in secret, points to the practice that later became known in the Christian tradition as contemplative prayer. Although there remain other legitimate interpretations of the word contemplation, the state of prayer described as infused contemplation has come to be generally accepted by subsequent spiritual authors as the definitive meaning. Let's look at a centering prayer first in detail. Then we will move to contemplative prayer later. Centering prayer has three stages or three moments, all of which were interrelated so that practitioner might move from one to the other stage at will, at intention, or under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. First stage is the prayerful reading of the text of the Old and New Testament led to reflection on the text, especially on the mysteries of Christ. The second stage is reflecting on the text led to responding with the act of faith, hope, and love, gratitude, and self-surrender. The third stage is responding led to resting in God beyond thinking or particular acts of the will as the process simplified. These three traditional stages of Christian spirituality are called, respectively, the purgative, illuminative, and unitive way. The path from one stage to the other stage is not so clear, and it does not always adequately address the physical, psychological, and spiritual obstacles that hinder the process, especially our unconscious motivation. So this part is a little bit different from Buddhist meditation. In case of a Buddhist meditation practice, there is some manual whenever each stage is moved to the next stage, what kind of psychological or mental, spiritual aspect can rise and fade away. However, in Christian tradition, that kind of change, alteration occur in unconscious motivation. Therefore, it cannot be adequately addressed the physical, psychological, and spiritual movement or obstacles. Let's notice the cascading movement into ever deeper state of silence. First, silence leaves behind external tumult, the environment we may be in, and the concerns of the moment by entering our inner room, the spiritual level of our being, the level of intuition and spiritual will. Silence closes the door, that is, shutting out and turning off the interior conversation we normally have with ourselves all day long as we judge, evaluate, and react to people and events entering and living our lives. As I said before, you might notice that, but most people have dialogue to himself or herself inside. Even though you are not externally speaking out, but inside your mind, you judge, evaluate, and sometimes talking to yourself inside. Silence is praying in secret to the Father. Father, speak to us beyond the sound of word. The centering prayer method responds to this invitation because the Father speaks us silently. How a centering prayer responds to this invitation? First, by consenting to God's presence and action within, by surrendering our will completely to God, by relating to God who dwells in secret, which is the silence of self. As God brings the new creation to life in interior silence, the new yourself, another yourself, the new you, has the world view that Christ shares in deep silence, and the Christ view of things become more important than your own private view. Let's look at first steps in centering prayer. Creativity and responsibility on the part of lay people to come up with structures that will enable them to live the contemplative dimension of the gospel everyday life in the world, in case of without expecting priest, religious, or anyone else to live the fullness of Christian life. In other words, maybe in your environment, it might be hard to find priest, religious, or anyone else to live the fullness of Christian life. At the time, creativity and responsibility on the part of lay people to come up with structures that will enable them to live the contemplative dimension of the gospel. Divine union is the goal for all Christians. Spiritual disciplines, both East and West, are based on the hypothesis that there is something that we can do to enter up the journey to divine union once we have been touched by the realization that such a state exists. Centering prayer is a discipline designed to reduce the obstacles to contemplative prayer. To enter up the journey to divine union, there might be some obstacles. To reduce obstacles, centering prayer is a method to reduce the obstacles so that practitioner can enter the stage of contemplative prayer. The modest package of a centering prayer appeals to the contemporary attraction from how-to method. A centering prayer is a way of bringing the procedures to be found in the contemplative technique of the spiritual masters of the Christian tradition out of the dusty page of the past into the broad daylight of the present. So how this method can bring from past into the present life to you. Centering prayer is not just a method. Centering prayer is not only a method, but also it is true prayer at the same time. If you are willing to expand the meaning of a contemplative prayer to include a method that prepare for it and lead into it, centering prayer can be identified as the first rung on the ladder of contemplative prayer, which rises step by step to union with God. So on the top of a ladder, there is God. To unite it to God, you have to move up along the ladder. To that, you have to step the rung. And each rung is equivalent to centering prayer. Centering prayer is a method of refining one's intuitive faculties so that one can enter more easily into contemplative prayer. It is not the only path to contemplation, but it is the good one, or maybe the best one in Christian tradition. As a method, it is a kind of extract of monastic spirituality. Centering prayer concentrates the essence of monastic practice into 2 periods of prayer each day. It's like when you take antibiotics, you have to maintain the right dosage to benefit from the medication. You have to keep up the required number of antibodies in the bloodstream to overcome the disease. In the same token, you have to keep up a certain level of interior silence in the psyche and nervous system if you want to obtain the benefit of a contemplative prayer. Dedication to God is developed by committing to one's spiritual practice for the love of God. Service to others is the outgoing movement of the heart prompted by compassion. So you can find compassion in both Buddhism and Christianity. It neutralizes the deep-rooted tendency to become preoccupied with our own spiritual journey and how we are doing. The habit of service to others is developed by trying to please God in what we do and by exercising compassion, beginning with those with whom we live. To accept everyone unconditionally is to fulfill the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. Even in the face of persecution, it is to fulfill the commandment to love one another. In Bible, as I have loved you, and to lay down one's life for one's friend. Centering prayer as a discipline is designed to withdraw our attention from the ordinary flow of our thought. We tend to identify ourselves with that flow. What kind of a think you have, then we can identify people. But there is a deeper part of ourselves. This prayer opens our awareness to the spiritual level of our being. This level might be compared to a great river on which our memories, images, feelings, inner experiences, and the awareness of outward things are resting. Many people are so identified with the ordinary flow of their thought and feelings that they are not aware of the source from which these mental objects are emerging. It is like a boat or debris floating along the surface of a river. Our thought and feelings must be resting on something. Our thoughts are resting on the inner stream of consciousness, which is our participation in God's being. That level is not immediately evident to ordinary consciousness, because we are not in immediate contact with that level. Prayer have to do something to develop our awareness of it. It is the level of our being that makes us most human. The values that we find, these are more delightful than the values that float along the surface of the psyche. We need to refresh ourselves at this deep level every day. Just as we need exercise, food, rest, and sleep, so also we need moment of interior silence, because this silence brings the deepest kind of refreshment. There are several factors to build up successful centering prayer. One is faith. Faith is opening and surrendering to God. The spiritual journey does not require going anywhere because God is always with us and in us. We are like someone sitting on the bank of a river and watching the boats go by. If we stay on the bank with our attention on the river rather than on the boat, the capacity to disregard the thought as they go by will develop, and the deeper kind of attention will emerge. A thought in the context of this method is any perception that appears on the inner screen of consciousness. In other words, anything whatsoever that registers on the inner screen of consciousness is a thought. This thought could be an emotion, or an image, or memory, or a plan, or a noise from outside, or a feeling of peace, or even spiritual communication. This method consists of letting go of every thought during the time of prayer, even the most devout thought. Here, letting go method comes also. How can facilitate letting go? To facilitate letting go, take a relatively comfortable position so that you will not be thinking about your body. Avoid a position that might cut off the circulation because then you will think of your discomfort. Choose a place that is relatively quiet in order not to be disturbed by excessive or unexpected noise. If there is no such place in your household, try to find a quiet time when you are least likely to be disturbed. It is a good idea to close your eyes because you tend to think of what you see. By withdrawing the sense from their ordinary activity, you may reach deep rest. And sudden sound or interruption, like the phone ringing, will shake you up. An alarm clock or timer, which is one way to notify yourself when the time is up, should be quiet one. If the clock is noisy, stuff it under a pillow. Try to avoid outside noise as much as you can. If noises happen anyway, do not be upset. Getting upset is an emotional charged thought that is likely to shatter whatever interior silence you may have been approaching. So do not carry on emotional baggage. Choose a time for prayer when you are most awake and alert. Early in the morning, before the ordinary business of the day, begins a good time to engage in a centering prayer. So it might be a good idea you engage in centering prayer before you go out to work. Once you pick up a suitable time and place and a chair or a posture that is relatively comfortable and close your eyes, then choose a sacred word that expresses your intention of opening, consenting, and surrendering to God. Make a sacred word be a single word of one or two syllables that you feel expresses your consent to God's presence. Gently place the sacred word in your awareness when you begin and each time you recognize you are thinking about some other thought. Why sacred word require? The sacred word is not a means of going where you want to go. The sacred word simply affirms and directs your intention to consent to God's presence and thus fosters favorable atmosphere for the development of the more general awareness to which your spiritual nature is attracted. Your purpose is not to suppress all thought because that is impossible. Even though you are engaging in centering prayer, you might think about, oh, I need to do laundry, oh, I need to go to grocery. So it's impossible to suppress all thought. You will normally have a thought after half a minute or less in a silence, unless the action of grace is so powerful that you are absorbed in God. Centering prayer is not a way of turning on the presence of God. Rather, it is a way of saying, here I am. The next step is up to God. It is a way of putting yourself completely at God's disposal. It is to submit to God's intentionality, which is to give Himself completely to you. You may be familiar with the gesture of folding your hands together with your fingers pointing upward. This is a symbol of gathering all your faculties together and directing toward God. The sacred word has a similar purpose. It is a gesture, but a mental gesture rather than a material one. The sacred word should be introduced without any force. Think the sacred word the same way you would any thought that arises spontaneously, that is, without any effort. The sacred word is a way of letting go of coarser thought and of disengaging from the more interesting ones that come down the stream of consciousness. Sacred word does this not by attacking thought directly, but by reaffirming your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. The renewal to the with consent create an atmosphere in which you can simply pay little or no attention to the normal and inevitable flow of thought because it becomes habitual. If you are nervous about doing what may seem like nothing for a period of time, recall that nobody hesitates to go to sleep for 6 or 7 hours every night. However, practicing this prayer is not doing nothing. You might feel like, oh, nothing happened to me. I feel nothing. So it seems to you nothing, but in Christian tradition, they said practicing centering prayer is not doing nothing. It is a very gentle kind of activity. As long as the will keeps consenting to God by returning to the sacred word when engaged with the thought, this is enough activity to stay awake and alert. 20 to 30 minutes is the minimum amount of time necessary for most people to establish interior silence and to get beyond their superficial thought. Check yourself whether you could do well not speak any word for 20 or 30 minutes. Someone could be easy to do that. Some others might not easy. Some others might feel that's not easy. You may be inclined to remain longer. If you can manage it, control yourself, silence longer than 30 minutes, then expand the time for silence longer. At the end of your chosen time span, begin to think your ordinary thought again. This may be a good time to converse with God. You may also wish to say some vocal prayer quietly to yourself or to begin planning your day. Give yourself about 2 minutes before opening your eyes. Withdraw from the ordinary use of exterior and interior senses brings you to a deep spiritual attentiveness. Opening your eyes right away could be annoying. So Christian tradition also provide detailed steps to engage in a centering prayer. As your sensitivity to the spiritual dimension of your being developed through the daily practice of this prayer, you may begin to find the awareness of God's presence arising at times in ordinary activity. You may feel called to return interiorly to God without knowing why. The quality of your spiritual sensitivity is developing and enabling you to pick up vibration from a world you did not previously perceive. Now you're merging into different dimensions of a world. Without deliberately thinking of God, you may find that God is often present in the midst of your daily occupations. This experience is like a color added to a black and white television screen. The picture remains the same, but it is greatly enhanced by the new dimension of the picture that was not previously perceived. The color was present, but not transmit because the proper receptive apparatus was missing. This missing part can be filled by engaging in a centering prayer. Centering prayer is a way of turning into a level of reality that is always present and in which we are invited to participate. Some durable discipline is required to reduce the obstacles to this expanded awareness. Breathing exercise, yoga, tai chi, or even jogging, such methods are fine for relaxation, but what we're more concerned with is the faith relationship to the God. This relationship is expressed by taking the time to open oneself to God every day, by taking God seriously enough to meet the God, Holy Spirit every day. An interview that one would not think of breaking except for the most serious reasons. Since this kind of prayer does not require any effort of thinking, you can keep your engagement even when you are sick. The fundamental disposition in centering prayer is consenting to God. Christian practice can be summed up by the word patience. In the New Testament, patience means waiting for God for any length of time, not going away and not giving in to boredom or discouragement. When you think that centering prayer does not give you any difference, then you think that engaging in centering prayer is doing nothing. But that's not true in Christian tradition. In other words, this practice need patience, waiting for God for long time. It is the disposition of the servant in the gospel who wait even though the master of the house delay his return until after midnight. When the master finally came home, he put the servant in charge of his whole household. If you wait, eventually God will manifest himself. Of course, you may have a long wait. That's why Christian practice can be summed by the word patience. From your successful centering prayer, you can reach out contemplative prayer. Contemplation is a fundamental constitution of human nature and hence available to every human being. It is assessed by letting go of one's own idea of ourselves, turning our will over to God, and resting in the divine indwelling that is already present within us and waiting to reveal itself to us. Regular periods of silence and solitude can dispose us to extend our consent to God's presence to every moment of our waking lives and therefore reduce the influences of the false self. They also mention about false self, true self and false self. The contemplative dimension of the gospel manifests itself in an even deeper union with the living Christ and the practical caring for others that flows from this relationship. It reveals the deeper meaning of the mysteries of Christ and the living word of God in Scripture. So today you have studied the contemplative practice or meditation in other religion rather than Buddhism. So you can solve quiz. Meditative practice can be found only in Buddhism. True or false? And the centering prayer can be identified as the first rung on the ladder of what? And this rises step by step to union with God. And you can find the answer from the previous slide. Which of the following is related to the movement from centering prayer to contemplative prayer? There are several factors required. So you can find this answer also from the previous slide. Answer these quiz question and send the email to me. That will be counted for your attendance. And the next week you will have a midterm, and midterm you will have 20 kinds of questions, all multiple choice questions. In midterm I give all multiple choice questions, and you can find the answers from lecture video. So the next week you will have midterm, and I will send you answer sheet. So you write down your name on the answer sheet, and also question 1, what could be the answer? So 20 kinds of question, you will write down the answer and then send it to me by email. Then I will grade them. So you will receive 2 kinds of attachment file. One is question file. The second attachment file is answer sheet. You can send me only answer sheet. I will briefly explain what and how you send answer sheet to me on the top of answer sheet. So read a short sentence and follow instruction, and then you write down the answer and then send that answer sheet to me as an attachment file. The due date of this week quiz is until next Wednesday, 7th of February. Okay, so this is the end of today's lecture.